guys. I had the opportunity, I think it's been a couple of years ago, to sit down with Elizabeth. She came to my office. We got to meet. I heard her vision for Inspired Leaders, and I loved it. When I came back to the business world, that was how I determined that I would actually get to meet other women that weren't stay-at-home moms, that had the opportunity to get out into the community, because that's something that we lack, especially this past year, is actually getting to connect with other business leaders in the community, because the way that you make an impact and the way that you create a significant impact is by doing it collectively. It doesn't come from you or you, it comes from all of us together. So thank you, Elizabeth, for putting this together, not just today, but the entire organization. I'm so glad that Julie's here, although it will probably make me cry, because the story I'm going to share with you today is what got me to this point. And at this point in my career, I am a 50-year-old female with the gray hair to prove it. I'm married. I have 5 children. We live just outside of the Woodlands on 7.5 acres with a barn and a small horse that's actually a Great Dane. And 2 cats. I'm an empty nester, even with COVID. I have 3 children away at college, and I have 2 that are adults and living in their own homes. Fortunately, in the Greater Houston area, so I get to see them on a regular basis. I was not always doing what I do now. I lead a group of loan officers in their production as well as their growth in the community. I have a team of my own where I'm a mortgage loan officer, and I have a team of 8 other ladies on my team that help us impact the Greater Houston area and actually all of Texas. We helped almost 600 families last year. And then I lead other loan officers throughout Houston. We have a small collection of 6 loan officers besides me, and together they impacted almost 1,000 families last year. So I say impacted because the way that I look at the mortgage industry is probably like the way that you look at what you do. You don't just do your job to do your job. You do your job because it's making a significant impact in the lives of others. And that's why we do what we do. I came back to the business in 2010 at a time when people were exiting the mortgage business. You all remember 2008 to 2010, the greatest financial crisis of our generation. It was the housing industry and Wall Street were rife with misdeeds that nearly collapsed our economy. It became known as the Great Recession. It was not the best time to restart your career, but I really didn't have a choice in that matter. I'd like to tell you it was this great planned strategy, because I like to be a person of strategy, but it wasn't. I'll take us back a few years prior to 2010. 8 years earlier, I was a young, married, working mom. I had 3 daughters. We had just recently relocated to the Woodlands. This was back in 2000. From 2000 to 2002, when we came here in 2000, I had 3 daughters. And by 2002, I had my 4th daughter. How many of you have 4 daughters? How many of you have 1 daughter or more? 4 daughters was entertaining, let me tell you. When Presley was born, my 4th daughter, I knew that at whatever cost it was, I wanted to stay home with my girls. That was important to me. It didn't matter what we had to sacrifice for that. I jokingly told my husband that I would live under a bridge if it gave me the opportunity to raise my children. And so that's what we did. I left an industry that I loved, one that I was having success in, and chose to be that stay-at-home mom. I filled those days with my girls, with cooking, with gardening. Yes, I love to garden. And Bible study and volunteering. That's where I met Julie, was at Woods Edge Church, and we became fast friends. During those years, my husband, who was in his mid-30s, was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it can be a debilitating illness. It was for him. It led to a great dependence on alcohol for him and eventually prescription pain medication. His addiction became worse, and with the collapse of the housing industry, it led to the failure of his residential construction business. We salvaged our home, we sold it so that the bank didn't take it, and took those proceeds, and we chose to relocate to a small town in Texas. We had determined that he would teach school. My parents lived in a little community between Centerville and Jewett and Buffalo, Texas, if you're familiar. Population 600, a far cry from the Woodlands, Texas. But it became home for us. My parents very graciously gave us some of the land that they had, and we were going to take the proceeds from that home and build our home there. He was going to teach school. I was going to continue raising our children, and we were going to restart our lives. While he was building that home, we lived in a single wide trailer, 1,100 square feet. We had nothing. When I tell you we had nothing, we had nothing. When we got up there, his addiction became worse. He didn't work. We were living off the equity in that home. There was me with I had a daughter in college at this point, and then we had 3 girls at home that were from 2nd grade to 7th grade. And it was an incredibly tough time. We started construction on this small home we were going to live in, and it sat half finished and had no prospects of what we were going to do. I never wanted to sit on my hands, attempted to get a job. When you're in a community of 600 people and you were not born and raised with those people, it's a little difficult to get a job. I was not college educated, so could not get a job that required that. And then for other jobs that I applied for, I was overqualified. So as things got worse, he began disappearing for days on end. When he was there, he wouldn't come home until early into the morning hours, and I was trying to keep our girls together. My friend Julie was a great source of sanity and comfort during those times, as were my parents. During those darkest days, our girls were on Medicaid. And we were on the 21st century version of food stamps, which was the Lone Star card. When it got to that point, I didn't want to get up in the morning. You wonder, how do we dig ourselves out of this hole? How did we get here? This family that had the beautiful 4-bedroom, 3-bath home in the Woodlands, going to church every Sunday and Wednesday and volunteering on Mondays and Fridays, and here we are all living in his space of addiction. 14 months into that, my dear friend Julie provided that first step out of the abyss. In July of 2010, a friend of hers who lived in a 3rd-floor apartment in the back of the Woodlands, and I'm going to really try not to cry, broke her leg. What a gift for me. As horrible as that sounds, because Julie knew that I needed to get out of where we were somehow, and just for a brief respite, get back into reality with my girls. She offered to let us stay in her 2-bedroom apartment. So my 3 girls and I packed up a bag, came to the Woodlands, and lived in her 2-bedroom apartment for a few weeks. Not very long, but it was a few weeks. And getting out of that toxic environment gave me the opportunity to realize that we weren't going to stay there. We could not stay there. Away from what had become this daily chaos of our lives, I realized that I needed a job. I had not been in the industry for 8 years, had not worked outside of the home for 8 years. I knew that I had been in mortgage for 8 years prior to becoming that stay-at-home mom. And so in the middle of the Great Recession, where mortgage companies were closing hourly across the nation and in our community, I determined I'm going to try and go back to mortgage, because I had tried to get a job in hospitality, I tried other places, and no one wanted to hire me. Our economy wasn't doing that good, if you remember. I had a friend from church who knew a gentleman that was looking to hire a loan officer for a real estate office here in the Woodlands. And I immediately showed up. I attempted to get the job. He hired me for it. In the matter of, on a Thursday, I got my offer letter. On Thursday afternoon, I leased a home in our old neighborhood. My parents paid that first month's rent. I went and enrolled my kids on Friday for school, and on Tuesday, they started in their new school. From Friday to Tuesday, I moved us into that home and did our best in getting us set up. We had some outdoor furniture in our living room. Here I was, almost 40 years old and living the dream. But I knew that there was hope for us. And I knew that there was an opportunity for us, and that's all that mattered to me. That fall of 2010 was not easy. We had nothing but each other and the love of our friends and family. I turned 40 years old in that house, and I would come home at night. I would leave in the mornings, get my kids on the bus, would drive to Katy, because that office in the Woodlands that I was supposed to be working in didn't turn out, and he sent me to Katy. So I would leave the Woodlands long before the Grand Parkway opened and drive to Katy each morning. I would work for 10 to 12 hours, and I would rush home to be with my girls. If you knew me back then and you looked close, you would see my $13 shoes and my mail order suit. I don't know if you realize it, but I'm 6'3½". So buying clothes off the rack doesn't happen too often for me. And so I ordered a suit from the Gap that was on clearance for 40% off. And with that and my $13 shoes from Payless, I started going to work, and I would just change out my shirts. And thankfully, my mom had given me what I like to think is good taste. And I had scarves, and I would borrow her scarves. And so I would change my shirts, and I would change my scarves, and I would wear that suit every stinking day, proudly knowing that I was going to make a difference for my kids. I had to work. I was full of hopes, dreams, and a promise to my girls that we were going to make it. I had nothing, truly nothing, but a die-hard work ethic, more faith than a mountain, and a whole lot of love for my girls. I had to believe I could do this because I had 4 girls depending on me, watching me, and absorbing every little thing. Those days were hard. I remember when I would race back home, and I would be that mom that would run into the back of the open house or into the sports meeting or piano recitals, and I'd be the one racing in at the back, sitting in the very back, because I was typically always just barely sliding in because I'd been working all day. And I felt like a failure as a mom. But I knew I had to provide for my kids. I did not want to go back to the life that we had. That was important to me. I had to work hard. I had to be an example of love, grace, and grit, determination, and success for each of my girls. So I persisted every day. I cried a lot of nights. And it was always behind closed doors. I wouldn't want my girls to see that from their mom. But slowly business started to come. People started to trust me, and I could see small steps becoming strides towards our new life. I remember when I opened my first bank account, because I didn't have one, because he didn't believe in bank accounts. It was such a celebration. It was over on Spring Cypress. I remember every detail about opening that bank account. I finally had a debit card at the age of 40, and I celebrated, because once we lost everything, I lost almost my identity. We didn't have a checking account. We didn't have our credit cards. We had nothing. So starting over again, I celebrated those. I remember when I started back, my goal was to close $100 million a year in mortgages. which seemed so funny. All the guys that I work with, because I do work in a male-dominated industry, all laughed at me because, one, I was old at 40. At 50, I laugh at that now, that I was old, because we're not old. But I was old, and that wasn't possible. But I remember my girls watched everything that I did. So I would make that phone call I didn't want to make. I kept thank you cards sitting by my nightstand every night, and I literally would not go to sleep until I wrote 10 thank you cards every single night. And I would get up and I would mail them in the morning. I knew that I had to keep building relationships, I had to invest in people, and I had to keep cheering everyone on. I didn't go into it thinking, I want to make $1 million a year. I went into it thinking, I want to impact people's lives, and hopefully along the way, I'll be able to make a living for my children and I. I look back on those days and I remember that woman. I'm grateful for every difficult moment. I'm grateful for every relationship. I'm grateful that I got to sleep on Jessica's bed for that little twin-size bed in her room. I am grateful for so much that happened during those times, because each of those times created an opportunity for me to grow and to be an example for my children and for those around me. I never forgot them and the difficulties that I experienced. My girls and I endured hardship beyond compare. Details I'll spare you today. Details that a small few in this room know, and more than anyone should endure. It was evident to me that I had to have a plan that would carry me through each day of my work and my life. I had to create a way of doing business built on enduring relationships and trust, because that's something that means so much to me. I needed to know that each day I was working to not only ensure a better life for my girls and I, but for my community as well. That commitment to relationships, serving others, and not doubting the gifts and talents God gave me have brought me to where I am today. Through it all, I've created a life that I love. I bought a home. That was huge. I bought another home, and this year I actually bought a vacation home in San Antonio, which makes me very happy. It's a place for us just to come together and enjoy. I've endured incredible sorrow. In 2014, I lost my mother to cancer. But not until she saw her daughter happy and thriving and succeeding at life and at love. The next year, my only brother took his life, and I never dreamed that I could go on, and yet I had to lead my girls through those traumatic experiences. Thanks to some determined friends and Match.com, I started dating again, and I married my best friend, Michael. My only regret is that I didn't marry him in my 20s, but I'm so grateful for him. He has just been the light of my life. In 2018, my daughter's father lost his fight to addiction. We watched his health decline over his last 3 years of life, and my girls lost their father. While I had not been married to him for several years, the pain for my girls and the pain of losing the man that I once knew and loved deeply was crushing, and it still is. I believe that you never stop loving the people that you love. But I persisted through all of that. Thinking back to that day in 2010 and every day since then, going back was not an option, and standing still was never enough for me. There are 3 questions that I ask myself, whether it's in running my business or serving others or co-leading my family with my husband. No matter what I do, I ask myself these 3 questions. What do I want? Why do I want it? And how do I get it? I have to know what is required of me, and I have to be honest about my ambition. Ambition's not a bad thing. You have to consider what it will take to do what you want, and you have to go for it with all that you have. Allow yourself to be aggressive about your ambition. There's nothing to be embarrassed about with that or ashamed. And then once you have ascertained why you want what you want, You must determine how to get it, but you can't ever forget your why. You have to know if you've set a plan or a goal and you have this dream for yourself, why do you want it? Because at some point you will fail. You will make mistakes. You will fall on your face. But if you have a why, you can pick yourself back up and you can keep forging ahead towards that goal. Once you have, it can't simply be a dream, you have to have a plan. And while your plan may not lay out every step you take over the coming years, it serves as a guide. Data and systems are my closest friends. Those people that work with me, like Scott, know that. I am a data nerd. It's important for me to know what the details are so that I know how to get it. Because if I know what has happened historically and what's going on right now, then I can look at that and I can plan out how I'm going to do something. When you think of what it is that you want in life, you must have a plan. A dream is never enough. A dream's nice, but it's not enough. You must have faith, for without it, I believe life itself is impossible. And you must lead with love and a heart to serve others. I think as I look back at 2010, forwarded all the way to 2021, in these past 10 years of business and life and growth and change, my goal was never to reach a certain financial status. And it's actually each year, it's difficult for me to say, I want to do this much next year. I want to close this many families. I want to do this much in dollar volume. Whatever those points are for you, that's always very hard for me, because for me, my goal is to impact others and to build a life built on deep relationships and trust. If I can leave you with but one phrase to remember, it would be, do not allow setbacks to set you back. Because we all experience them every day. Sometimes they're more significant than others, but those setbacks can't be the definition of us. And if we remember that why, then we can forge ahead and keep going. Thank you, guys.